So yeah, definitely call. I might show up game day.
Well, my problem is that I think I'm the second team, and I thought it was going to be first team, so I got to.
Oh, if they're already done teams, I might not.
They've got 3 teams, and I thought I'd be starting in the outfield. I don't
Who beats you?
Well, it looks like Wilson Georgia was very good. I mean, he's a professional athlete.
Well, there's that.
Yeah, there's that. Then Winstrop, Brad's a good athlete, but I still think I'm a better outfielder.
I may just show up.
Is it us?
I guess it's gonna be just us. I don't know how Henry came.
Good.
So that we just check.
We've got boats.
So maybe we. How many innings do you have to make in a row?
To make it official, yeah. 5.5. Yeah, they're building it there. They're building it. I hope it comes in. I'll be glad to.
Administrator Gaynor, we have votes, we're told in 10 minutes, so hopefully maybe we can just get through opening statements, and then hopefully the votes won't be that long. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. I welcome everyone to today's hearing on the FY 2020 budget proposal for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Administrator Gaynor, welcome back. I would like to begin by thanking FEMA for its work in assisting Californians recovering from last year's devastating wildfires in Butte, Los Angeles, and Ventura counties. Last month, you testified on FEMA's continuing efforts to support recovery from recent disasters. Since that hearing, Chairman Price and I had the opportunity to visit Puerto Rico and see some of those efforts firsthand. We also met with officials from both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, as well as disaster survivors. And I thank your staff for facilitating and supporting these meetings. They help to make them very, very successful. FEMA and its employees continue to lead our nation in recovering from the unprecedented disasters of the last few years. While it is true FEMA has taken positive steps towards recovery in Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, it is clear that there is still much more to be done to support the islands' recoveries. Your agency is doing this work while at the same time implementing and developing guidance on dozens of new provisions created by the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. Every FEMA program and activity is critical. That is why I was disappointed that the administration proposes an overall cut of 8.5% to FEMA's budget outside of the Disaster Relief Fund. The proposed cuts are particularly glaring in the federal assistance account, which has a proposed 20% reduction to the current year budget. With FEMA proposing a new National Priority Preparedness Grant Program, the proposed cuts to existing programs are even larger. This includes, for example, a 37% cut to the State Homeland Security Grant Program and a 33% cut to the Urban Area Security Initiative Program. The budget also proposes to eliminate programs that train state and local Homeland Security officials, emergency managers, and first responders, including those at the Center for Homeland Defense and Security in my home state of California. Because states and urban areas rely heavily on FEMA grants to help improve and maintain their preparedness levels, the proposed cuts leave a gaping hole in your budget that we will need to find a way to fill. We will discuss these and other aspects of your budget proposal this afternoon. As you did in our hearing last month, I hope you can provide us with an update on recovery efforts from recent disasters. Again, I thank you for appearing before the subcommittee today, and I now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And again, I appreciate your working with the majority and the minority in this subcommittee. It's always a privilege to work with you. With votes coming, I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. But Mr. Gaynor, I want to thank you, sir, from coming back to our subcommittee today. I thought our last hearing was extremely productive, and I know a lot of my oversight questions were answered about the challenges FEMA is facing and the ongoing efforts to help those affected by recent storms. I also wish to thank not only you, but your very attentive and cooperative staff. It's been a pleasure working with you all. Last time we met, my state, the great state of Tennessee, was coming out of some terrible flooding. The affected counties did receive some funds, but we're still cleaning up, and many families are still working on resolving damages to homes and businesses. I appreciate everything that FEMA is doing to help our citizens, and I respectfully urge you to keep working with our state as we continue working with our localities to repair these damages. Today, we are here to discuss fiscal year 2020. I'm sure you've heard a lot about your proposals from your state and local partners. We hear from them too, and I think we are probably going to have some of the same questions about your budget requests. I look forward to your testimony today, sir, and with that, Madam Chairman, I yield back my time.
Mr. Gaynor, we look forward to your testimony, and we will submit the full text of your testimony for the record.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Roybal Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Pete Gaynor, and I am the acting administrator of FEMA. On behalf of Acting Secretary McAleenan and the administration, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss FEMA's fiscal year 2020 budget and how it supports the execution of the agency's strategic plan. Today, FEMA remains steadfast in its commitment to support the needs of disaster survivors. We continue to work tirelessly to support state, local, tribal, and territorial partners before, during, and after disasters. We've overcome many challenges, and we've gained invaluable knowledge, which we have incorporated into our strategy going forward. Today, I would like to discuss FEMA's budget in terms of the goals and objectives of the agency's strategic plan. This plan seeks to unify and further professionalize emergency management across the nation and helps drive both short and long-term funding decisions. The plan establishes three strategic goals for FEMA. First is to build a culture of preparedness. Second, to ready the nation for catastrophic disasters. And finally, to reduce the complexity of FEMA. Every segment of our society, from individual to government, from industry to philanthropy, must be encouraged and empowered to prepare for the inevitable impacts of future disasters. Building a cultural preparedness within our communities will allow the nation to significantly reduce the risk before the next disaster. The budget requests $2.3 billion in preparedness and mitigation grants to help achieve that goal. In 2018, Congress took significant steps to support FEMA's efforts with the passage of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, or DURA. This transformational legislation will assist the nation in reducing risks and increasing preparedness in a more meaningful and tangible way. The budget requests funds to begin implementing the key mitigation-related elements of DRRA. While we will never be able to eliminate all risk, we must reduce known risks as much as possible. FEMA continues to work with the communities and insurers to close the insurance gap and to double insurance coverage across the nation. Managing risk through insurance, including the National Flood Insurance Program, or NFIP, helps communities recover faster following disasters and reduces overall costs for taxpayers. The budget includes $5.1 billion to support the operation of the NFIP. FEMA's second goal is to ready the nation for catastrophic disasters. Catastrophic disasters include low and no-notice incidents, which can overwhelm the government at all levels and threaten national security. They are life-altering incidents for those impacted, causing a high number of fatalities and widespread destruction. Focusing federal efforts and resources on preparing for catastrophic events is critical to ensure that the response and recovery missions are successfully executed. The budget includes $14.1 billion for the Disaster Relief Fund to support response and recovery operations. The budget also includes $1.7 million and 25 positions to support the expansion of FEMA integration teams, or FIT teams. These teams, which are embedded full-time into state emergency management agencies, are critical to improve customer service and to provide targeted technical assistance to help build capacity and address capability gaps before the next catastrophic disaster. Currently, FEMA has embedded 18 FIT teams across the nation, with more to follow. Communications and pre-positioned commodities are also critical to readying the nation. We saw this in Puerto Rico, where FEMA deployed its mobile emergency response support resources with mobile satellite, radio, logistics support services to provide command and control communications, situational awareness, and program delivery to overcome communication challenges. The budget includes $6 million for 6 more mobile emergency operations vehicles. Further, building on lessons learned from 2017, the budget requests $3 million to expand the distribution center in Hawaii to increase stocks of pre-positioned, life-saving, and life-sustaining commodities maintained outside the continental U.S. The final goal of the agency's strategic plan is to reduce the complexity of FEMA. FEMA must be flexible and adaptable to meet the needs of individuals and communities, and it must deliver assistance as simply as possible. For example, FEMA is consolidating and updating all FEMA individual assistance policies and program guidance to streamline information about the programs. FEMA is also reducing complexity by modernizing its legacy IT systems to better support grantees and survivors. The budget includes $77.6 million for these investments. The FY 2020 President's budget provides FEMA with the resources to help people before, during, and after disasters, while allowing us to strive for a vision of a more prepared and more resilient nation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to any questions you or the committee may have.
Mr. Gaynor, since you last appeared before the subcommittee, there have been several new disaster declarations, including for the catastrophic floods in the Midwest and severe storms and tornadoes in the South. Can you provide us with an update on those disasters and the efforts being made to support the recovery of the affected communities?
Yes, ma'am. I had the honor to visit Iowa a couple weeks ago with the Vice President to see firsthand the devastation in both Nebraska and Iowa. Water is still on the ground today. We visited a farmer who had been living on the property for over 110 years, and it was the worst flooding that the family has seen since the 1950s. Devastation from flooding is sobering. All the impacted states, I think there's 3 or 4 so far, have applied for disaster assistance. We are out there today registering disaster survivors to make sure that we can deliver the maximum resources, disaster resources to those impacted. We continue to do this across the country, not only in flooding in Alabama with tornadoes. We have 52 open disasters today in which we're delivering disaster response to survivors from wildfires to floods to tornadoes to earthquake. Quite a wide expanse of our support to the nation and those disasters that need our help today.
As I mentioned in my opening statement, the President's budget calls for cuts of more than 20% to FEMA's preparedness training and grant programs, which helps states and communities prepare for natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and other high-consequence events. It does not appear that the risk of such events have waned. Has FEMA determined that the risk warrants a reduced investment in preparedness? And if not, can you explain the basis for the proposed reductions?
Yes, ma'am. We have had a historically constrained operations support budget over the years, and frankly, there's a few places to cut. And when we look across of all the potential programs or resources that we provide, grants is one of those. And the way we look at it is preparedness is a shared responsibility from the federal government to the state to the local. Over the past 10 or 12 years, through DHS and FEMA, we've funded at least $50 billion in preparedness grants. We've brought down a significant amount of risk. Some of those grants have turned in over time to entitlement grants, and really hasn't kept up with the evolving threat, emerging threats. And so we think it's fair and equitable to ask states and locals to offload some of that responsibility for preparedness onto their own budgets so we can deliver and keep up with new emerging threats and keep up with innovation. So again, when it's a constrained budget, it's hard to find or it's hard to reduce the impact on some of these. And I know firsthand, I was a local and state emergency manager. I know how much locals and state directors depend on that. But again, we believe that preparedness across the country is a shared responsibility.
I'll be asking another question a little bit later on that highlights the fact that states and local governments do contribute their own money towards these programs. But if you could provide the subcommittee a list of where you think these entitlement grants exist and the fact that there actually is necessarily not a need for them any longer.
Yes, ma'am, we'll do that.
Okay. Mr. Fleischman?
Thank you, Ms. Orville-Allard. And actually, you asked a question I was going to ask, so thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's for efficiency purposes. I'll just ask Mr. Gaynor some basic questions. When you were the director of the Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency, which federal grants were most important to you in maintaining and building capability, sir?
I think for a local emergency manager, it's the EMPG, or the Emergency Management Performance Grant. We give those out to the 54 states and territories each year.
And what values in that capacity did you find in the EMPG program, sir?
Basically, it supports operations. So if you had some difficulty sourcing or funding personnel through your local or state appropriated budget, EMPG helps you with that. It also helps you with preparedness initiatives. So if there's something that you didn't have in your budget from the state, the EMPG gives you a little more bandwidth to deliver those preparedness initiatives that are important to your local or state program.
Yes, sir. The new Disaster Recovery Reform Act provided authorization for pre-disaster mitigation program. How is FEMA working with state emergency managers to shape this program and reduce vulnerabilities in the nation?
Yes, sir. So first, I'd like to thank Congress for helping us pass the DRRA. It is really transformational legislation about how we look at disasters. We know we're going to pay whatever amount of money a disaster costs us after the disaster, and this really turns the tables that we want to invest in pre-disaster mitigation before a disaster happens. We have a team, so pre-disaster mitigation is not new to FEMA, and it's not new to local or state directors across the country. We have a program today that has been in effect for many years called pre-disaster mitigation, roughly about $50 million a year across the country. We are in close coordination with our state directors. We briefed out to, most recently about a month ago, to the National Emergency Managers Association meeting that was held in Washington, D.C., NEMA, and we're in a constant dialogue to make sure that we understand the needs on the street and we want to make sure that we incorporate those into our plan moving forward. So it's an ongoing dialogue. You know, many of us are former directors. We understand there's certain issues that apply to certain states, and so we want to make sure that we're thoughtful about building a plan that suits everyone's needs.
Mr. Gaynor, then as a follow-up to that, what feedback has FEMA gotten from states on those efforts specifically?
I'm not sure I can answer the specific feedback. I know that we're in dialogue with them. I'd be happy to get with the program managers to see what kind of best practices that states have offered in the new program.
Is the Disaster Recovery Reform Act a comprehensive reform bill, or do you see FEMA reaching out to authorizers to further refine or expand the legislation?
I think right now there's 49 different sections of the DRA that we're trying to understand, and I'll go back to the pre-disaster mitigation section 1, 2, 3, 4, where we can set aside 6% of disaster funds for pre-disaster mitigation. That's the one that we're trying to work on first and fastest to make sure we can get that out on the street. Our goal is to have it available for application in October of 2020. There are other sections of the DRA that we're working on, mitigation for post-fire mitigation. We have our plate full in understanding the current legislation, and I think until we get past all the sections that we're required to implement by law, I think we're good for right now.
Yes, sir. At your last hearing with this subcommittee, we talked a little about FEMA integration teams. I was actually interested to learn that Tennessee is one of the 16 states with an existing team in our state office. Can you share how the FEMA integration team helped or facilitated the response in the recent Tennessee flooding?
I can't talk about Tennessee exactly, but I can tell in general we have numerous stories from disasters to exercises to training where the integration teams bring a new perspective, the federal perspective, again, to close the gaps in state or local plans, make exercises more robust, and we have, matter of fact, I met with some of the FEMA managers, the FIT team managers last week, and it really is we think it's really a great initiative. We've gotten great feedback, and our goal is to have every FIT team in every state, and we support, and again, we look for funding to make that happen in this FY 2020 budget.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Administrator, and Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Mr. Administrator, the humanitarian crisis due to the influx of unaccompanied kids and families have created a burden on state and local jurisdictions, including NGOs down there on the border. Back, I think it was in 2014, I helped change the law here in Appropriations to address some of those issues. And then I think on July 13th of 2017, you all came out with an information bulletin that provided guidance for Homeland Security grants programs to be, be allowable for costs or reimbursements to those local communities that provide humanitarian care and relief to those unaccompanied kids and families, food, water, medicine, medical supplies, et cetera, et cetera. Earlier this year, DHS Secretary Nielsen reportedly said that the administration would treat this surge, the new group of people, like a Category 5 hurricane. My question is, what's FEMA's response to address this humanitarian relief for unaccompanied children and families? Just the fact that it's had an impact on local communities. I'm from the border, so I talk from personal knowledge there and talking to other folks, and basically, will communities be eligible for reimbursement via those Homeland Security grant programs for expenses that communities, whether it's McAllen or Brownsville or NGOs, I mean, they're carrying the burden of this. So I just want to see if I can get your thoughts on what y'all can do, taking in consideration that law that we changed back in 2014 when the surge started?
Yes, sir. So right now, this is not a Stafford Act emergency, so we are not using any disaster relief dollars to fund any of our support to CBP or ICE. So it is not an emergency in that aspect. The grant part of it is typically in Homeland Security grants, most of the money, a majority of the money goes to backfill pay and overtime. So if it's an eligible expense under the rules of those grants, they can use it. I would have to know the specifics about how they're using it to make sure it's actually eligible. And I think the state directors who are the SAAs or the state administrative agents will make sure that they use that money appropriately.
Would you be surprised that in the state of Texas, where we've gotten the majority on it, since 2014, only $400,000 have been allocated to the local communities, which is literally a drop in the bucket? It's not working. It's not really working the way we've set this up. So I know they're going to call votes, and I certainly want to give my other colleagues an opportunity. I would like to know if there's somebody here in your staff that we can follow up on this, because it's not working. $400,000 since 2014 is literally a drop in the bucket. So we'd love to sit down with you and give you a little bit more time to digest this and then give us some of your thoughts.
Typically, sir, we give that money to a state, and they run the program. So each state has different requirements, different initiatives, different priorities. So why the state has not reimbursed, I would have to look into it. We don't reimburse those things directly. It's really the state is responsible for running those grant programs.
Right, it goes to the state.
Correct. But I'd be happy to find out what some of the roadblocks are down there.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Acting Administrator Gaynor. Thank you for being here again. Last time we met, I brought up the pending expiration of NFIP on May 31st, and I think you've said it's been about 40-plus extensions, and we know every time we come up against the calendar deadline, it makes a lot of communities that live on or near the water very nervous. It makes realtors, economic developers, but most importantly, homeowners who depend on the insurance to be able to insure their homes. 64,000 NFIP policies is probably higher now since last time we've talked, because I know they continue to attract new policyholders. Could you just comment on the importance of NFIP not allowing the program to lapse, but also maybe talk or share your thoughts on getting with the private sector and coming up with maybe an all hazards type solution so we can address this, and what is, if anything, FEMA doing to kind of work with the private sector to address NFIP?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So if I can just put into context insurance. So FEMA has a different disaster programs that we deliver to survivors. One of them is individual assistance. The cap for individual assistance is about $34,500 for a number of different programs. If you go back and look at Harvey in Texas, the average IA payout was $4,000. So not many people maxed out the $34,000 for whatever reason. If you look at same disaster, you look at how much we paid out for NFIP insurance to those that had insurance, it's $130,000. And, it's obvious, would you rather have a check from FEMA for $4,000 or a check from NFIP for $130,000? And I would imagine that most people say, I want that check to make me as whole as possible and get me back in my home. And insurance is really not it's about protecting property, we understand that, but it really is about saving lives, maintaining your livelihood, maintaining your neighborhoods, and maintaining your communities and businesses. That's how we look at insurance. It needs to be overhauled. We really haven't had a significant overhaul since the 1970s. It needs to be more affordable. It needs to be more transparent. It needs to really reflect risk. I don't think the way we have policies right now reflect the risk where you live. And so we're trying to adapt a new way of looking at insurance to make sure everyone understands how valuable insurance is as opposed to other things. Should we have a lapse? it will negatively impact home closings. It will negatively impact renewals, and so we don't want that. We would like a reauthorization, a year-long reauthorization, and have the opportunity to work with Congress to really re-look at NFIP and make sure it's affordable and transparent for everyone and reflects risk, and it doesn't do that today. So we want to have a shot at reforming NFIP sooner rather than later.
Well, thank you, Acting Administrator Gaynor. I concur with your thoughts, and I think maybe a year or 24 months allow Congress to really look at this and come up with some common sense reforms that protect the homeowner but also protect the taxpayer. And with that, I'll be sensitive of my time, and I'll yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Ming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just ask one question to be sensitive to my colleagues' time as well. Wanted to also ask about Urban Area Security Initiative, which assists, as you know, high-threat, high-density urban areas for terrorism preparedness, which is very important to my home state of New York. There are proposed cuts to both the Urban Area Security Initiative, a decrease of $22.4 million, and the State Homeland Security Grant Program, decrease of $17.4 million. I represent a district in New York City, which, as you may know, is a highly targeted city for terrorist attacks. In fiscal year 2018, 10 houses of worship just in my district alone received its much-needed grant. How will FEMA ensure the safety of Americans is not compromised as a result of this decrease in funding?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So there, in a tough budget for FEMA, it's hard to eke out savings that really don't impact either the resources that we deliver or preparedness or recovery. I mean, there's some hard choices to be made. Our O&S budget line has remained flat for years. It doesn't give us much flexibility in deciding what we can live with and what we can't. One of those is grants, and when it comes to grants, we look at it as a shared responsibility, just like I'm sure you've heard before that emergency management is like a four-legged stool where there's the federal government, state and local, the individual, and private and NGOs. All those legs have to be working together or have to be intact for the whole system to work. We believe that we have brought down a lot of risk, $50 billion over 12 years across the nation. The grants, in some cases, have not kept up with threat, so we want to make sure that we're keeping up with emerging threat and redefining risk as we move along. I'm not sure they do that exactly today. And again, we look at why do we cut grants, and the answer, I think, from my point of view is that we share this responsibility at all levels, from the federal government to state and to locals. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so, I mean, what are some of the higher priorities you stated? It's stated in the 2020 budget justification. What are the higher priorities?
One of them is our legacy IT system, 40 years old. We haven't really kept pace with modernizing that, and that directly impacts how we deliver disaster resources to survivors. We have our grants modernization program, which is trying to put together 10 or 12 different grant platforms. Again, it directly impacts how we deliver preparedness and disaster grants across the country. So some of these things we haven't paid attention to for the long haul, and we're just, frankly, we're running out of time. We need to address it in a more significant way.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Newhouse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Administrator Gaynor, for being here with us this afternoon. I appreciate your time and commitment to FEMA and our protecting our citizens. I represent one of our great national laboratories, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, which, as you know, DHS, along with DOE, utilize for a lot of different things. For example, I think there was a predictive modeling that was developed at PNNL to understand flood risk for hurricane landfalls, and just more recently using that model to understand drying time of affected areas so that would allow first responders to prioritize their recovery efforts. So a lot of different things that have been beneficial to FEMA's efforts. And my question, in the interest of time, and thank you, Madam Chair, is to hear from you your perspective on how you plan to continue using and engaging in the labs to ensure that DHS makes the best use of their unique expertise that's available.
Yes, sir. We've used the Civic Lab in some really cutting-edge modeling, I think, simulation, to make sure that we understand risk and threat. We've used some of that modeling to help us understand the impact of inland flooding and hurricanes. And we continue to delve into how we can better understand those risks and threats through modeling. And again, I think part of it is how we save money doing that and be smarter about how we deliver disaster resources. And more importantly, how do we build a better defense with pre-disaster mitigation? So if you understand the risk and the threat, and now we have this great program under DRRA, how to deliver pre-disaster, that modeling is very helpful to design a program that makes a more significant impact than we ever have had the opportunity to do before. So again, really a great program. We support it, and we derive a lot from it. So it's important to us to keep that partnership going.
So it helps on both sides, the preemptive
Absolutely.
efforts as well as the coming to the rescue and after an event.
Absolutely, yes, sir.
So, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that, and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Aguilar.
I appreciate the courtesy of my colleagues allowing me to ask a question. Mr. Newhouse and Palazzo, that is for you. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Acting Administrator, in regards to surge capacity, it appears FEMA obviously had some issues responding to multiple extreme events, Harvey, Irma, and Maria, within weeks apart. Can you tell me proactively what are some of the steps FEMA's taking to enhance surge capacity and preparation efforts? Obviously, we have hurricane season months away. What are we doing now to prepare for that?
Yes, sir. Hurricane season 31 days away. Not that we're counting. So I think, first of all, when you look back at the 2017-18 hurricane seasons, wildfire seasons, FEMA was not designed for that end of the spectrum. And I think you've heard my predecessor say before that, a bigger FEMA is not the answer. We need to be a smarter FEMA when we deal with disasters and how we source our staff. We've just completed a disaster workforce review to make sure we really understand what are the skill sets that we need to apply to a disaster, and do we have enough of those? And in some cases, we've reduced the skill set because we have enough. In other cases, like public assistance delivery, we need a lot more, and we have a plan to try to close that gap. Right now, when you look at Puerto Rico, we're spending a significant amount of money in disaster relief down there. We have committed the entire agency, all our disaster public assistance experts from across FEMA, from Hawaii to the Virgin Islands, to help understand and help maximize the delivery of those dollars. So we have learned a lot. We're trying to be smarter inside. There are some challenges in trying to find and hire those skill sets, but it's on the top of our charts to again be ready to deliver disaster assistance, whether it's a small disaster or a catastrophic disaster.
And whether there's one or whether there's multiple.
That's correct, sir.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I yield back, Madam Chair.
That completes the first round of questioning. And Mr. Gaynor, we do have votes, and we honestly don't know how long it's going to take. So we have an agreement among our committee members here that we will submit the rest of our questions, so you're not kept here unnecessary for any long length of time. So I appreciate your being here, and we look forward to your answers to the questions that we will be submitting and others that we will have for you.
Thank you very much. Honored to be here today, and we look forward to answering those questions. Thank you very much.
fix it before the next extension expires. But I think the acting administrator said it's perfect. We need to have a commission